Good afternoon. My name is Carissa Provost, Clinical Director at Insight Treatment Center here in Santa Clarita. You're listening to KHTS, Santa Clarita's hometown station, FM 98.1 and AM 1220. A little bit about Insight is we are a treatment facility for teens and their families. I call them children sometimes, and I get in trouble for saying that from them. Teens and their families who are struggling with mental health and or substance abuse related issues. Again, I'm the clinical director at our Santa Clarita location. We have other locations throughout Southern California and a couple in Central California as well. And our program is an intensive outpatient program, again, for teens who are struggling with mental health issues and or substance abuse struggles, and they might have received services prior to coming to us for intensive outpatient. Maybe they've been in regular outpatient services once or twice a week with a therapist, or they have been hospitalized or in a residential program. So Insight Treatment Facility is in between residential and outpatient services. So it's intense for a reason. We have the teens and their families committed to a program that consists of many hours per week of group with their peers, facilitated by therapists. They also participate in weekly individual and family therapy, as well as parenting group, support group is provided, as well as a multi-family group where a family participates each week in the middle or the center of our program, and the families all participate as support system for the family who is participating in the middle. The teens also participate in weekly 12-step meetings and fellowship so that they can engage in activities with one another outside of treatment, but in healthy and safe ways that don't include drugs, alcohol, or other risky behavior types of things that teens get themselves into. Our philosophy is very much a family-oriented program, so it is not a program for families who have identified their teen as the, quote, problem in the family. It is a whole family encompass issue, and that's why we are highly focused on incorporating the family into our treatment. And how folks come to us are various ways. We get referrals from local schools, local therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, hospitals, residential treatment centers, other intensive outpatient programs, word of mouth, internet. And what makes our program unique, I know I keep emphasizing the family component of it, but I think that's what makes our program stand out is in comparison to other types of intensive outpatient programs for teens. We have a large emphasis on the family component of the program. It is a program where we ask families to commit for a minimum of 9 months to about a year, sometimes longer, depending on the family and the concerns and issues going on. So again, it is a intensive, committed program. It entails, again, the group therapy is a large component of our program. We do believe that teens need to hear from other teens and know that they're not alone in their struggles and then the things that they're experiencing, their fears, their anxieties, their stress, their dysfunctional relationships. So that is a huge component of our program as well. Let's see, what else can I share about it? We also have Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So oftentimes people ask, my teen isn't suffering from a substance abuse related issue. Why would they need to come to intensive outpatient program? Again, we serve both, and oftentimes families ask, why does my teen need to participate in a 12-step program if they're not currently struggling with a substance abuse related issue? Couple things for both of those questions that often come up. Intensive outpatient program, again, is for teens who maybe they've tried working with a therapist, an outpatient, once or twice a week, but that hasn't proven to have been enough and they need more support. That might be a reason why a teen might come to us. Additionally, the reason why we have families and their teens engage in AA treatment, 12-step programs, even if they don't have a substance abuse related issue, is because we do want them to become familiar with those components and philosophies of AA, so that if in case they ever find themselves faced with a potential substance abuse related issue down the road, they'll have access to services, they'll understand what 12-step is about. It also is a way to learn additional strategies and tools, even if they don't have a substance abuse related issue. There are tons of 12-step meetings that are not just substance abuse related, so we do find it is really important to expose teens to those programs and supports. Another thing that makes us unique, I think, at Insight Treatment Center is we basically take out all of the parenting decisions and questions that parents are often faced with and ask families to turn everything over to us. Sometimes that can be challenging for families to agree to, but kids and families come to us because oftentimes they've tried many things and it hasn't been working. So we ask families to trust us and to help support them in making some decisions that are often really difficult to make as a parent when you're in it. We're a few steps removed, so it's a little easier. We've been doing this for a long time. We know what works, but it is certainly a commitment that oftentimes families struggle with initially, but once they get into it, recognize that it is really beneficial to their teen and their family. We ask families to make changes as well. Again, it's not a fix my child kind of a program. We ask families to make changes as well. So that can be challenging at times when parents often see the behaviors that are negatively impacting their teen, and sometimes parents question their own involvement in how their teen became, started acting out or started having mental health related issues. I certainly don't blame parents for all these things, but there is an impact in how families and parents respond. And sometimes things just happen in families that is no fault to parents that can impact a teen's way of operating in the world, how they see themselves, their emotional responses, their challenges in relationships. Sometimes it can be something as simple as a divorce that really negatively impacts a teen. And as we all know, divorce is prevalent and happens every day. Bullying is a huge component that often impacts teens in ways that oftentimes we don't understand until we begin uncovering the layers and how teens view themselves based on those really negative experiences that they've had. So the reason why our program is 9 months or more is because it does take a long time to uncover, sort of peel back the onion layers to really find out what's going on and to begin to repair some of those issues, ways of thinking, ways of being, ways of operating in relationship, and to make changes. Those changes, those behaviors, those ways of being didn't happen overnight. So although there are great programs that are more short-term programs, our belief is that it takes a long time to uncover the issues and make significant changes that are longer lasting. Another component of our program, so we have therapists at each facility. We have a drug and alcohol counselor at each facility. We also have a program aide who is often a graduate of our program, so maybe they're a couple of years out. So the program aide is sort of the bridge between the teen and our treatment professionals. So they can actually be in the teens' shoes and share what their experiences were like, not just with the teens, but with the families, what was helpful for them, what wasn't helpful, their struggles, their challenges. They wholeheartedly understand what it's like to be receiving treatment in an intensive outpatient program. So the kids really connect oftentimes with our program aides. Our drug and alcohol counselors, kind of self-explanatory, but they also really help enforce the guidelines and rules and structure for our programs. We do have we call it the insight way, and sometimes it's hard to explain to people who aren't within our program, but we have a whole approach that encompasses, again, who teens are hanging out with, who are they spending their time with, are these healthy relationships? Sometimes, again, it's not to control but it can feel controlling at times as we build in their skill set and ways of interacting that are healthier ways of being. So in that initial phase of treatment, it can feel, for some families, it can feel like a lot. We're really in their business in ways that other programs maybe are not. Again, we're a step down from a residential program. So that's a little bit about our program. We are really engaged in the schools around the communities in the areas that we serve. So we are open and have provided many presentations, trainings for parents, for school personnel, both on any issues related to mental health and or substance abuse. We've had teens who have recently graduated or about to graduate from our program speak at schools when we've had teen panels. And all of those services in the community are at no cost to schools or local organizations. We really enjoy doing that to reduce the stigma of mental health related issues and substance abuse related issues. Although we've gotten much better in our society talking about mental health related concerns, we continue to have a lot of stigma around mental health related issues, some more than others. So we are really happy to go out in the community and provide more information and share some things about what might be helpful to teens. We spend a lot of time with them, so we have a sense of what feels supportive to them and what doesn't. So sometimes it's just sharing with parents and families how to approach teens. So oftentimes parents get frustrated because teenagers, you ask a teenager, how was your day? And they'll say, fine, and shrug their shoulders. And parents are trying to connect with their kids and their teens. And so it's this unique time of life where teens are individuating more from their parents, but still need their parents sometimes more than ever at those critical ages where they're developing their identity or questioning their identity, and are not quite an adult, but they're not young children. So it's this kind of interesting time of life for teens that can be very anxiety provoking and stressful, not just for teens, but for their parents too, who don't know what to do in certain situations when their teens are seemingly acting out or isolating or not connecting in the way that they used to when they were younger. So sometimes, it's a matter of just addressing the approach and building connections between teens and parents. But it's a stressful time. So we're happy, again, to provide information to any local organization, schools, who might be interested in any particular topic. Some of the topics we've addressed recently, let's see. Well, when all the schools went back after COVID, we did a lot of presentations about how to re-engage teens post-COVID, what some of the things to look for, how they might have been impacted by being isolated at home. So we did a lot of those. Again, the teen panels are great because teens like hearing from teens. They don't like hearing from us older folks sometimes. So it's a really great way for teens to be able to share their own journey, and how they have transformed in their mental health and or substance abuse related histories. Other topics we have discussed are, it really depends on what schools are looking for, but we're open. Again, we have a lot of experience working with teens with all kinds of presenting issues, as well as their parents and families. And we really want to provide support to families in the community, to teens, and to all of those who are doing the work to support teens in our communities. It certainly does take a village. So other ways that families can connect with us, we're open to consultation too at no cost. Families are welcome to call at any time and just request local resources, referrals, we can answer any questions about things that they are seeing in their teen that they might need additional assistance with. So again, Insight Treatment Center in Santa Clarita, and we have locations in Pasadena, Van Nuys, El Monte, where am I forgetting? Those are our main locations, and also in the Central Valley. All right, so we are going to wrap up this segment, and we are going to be talking with Dr. Marcus Rodriguez in just a moment. Welcome back to Insight Treatment Hour. You are listening to KHTS, Santa Clarita's hometown station, FM 98.1 and AM 1220. We have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Marcus Rodriguez is on the show. He is a licensed psychologist and founder of Youth and Family Institute in Santa Monica. Welcome, Dr. Rodriguez.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you for being here. So I was hoping you could share a little bit about your background. You have an interesting background, I think. I read up a little bit on you, and just curious about how your background led to you becoming a clinical psychologist.
Yeah. So I grew up in Mexico, and then I did high school and college here in the States, in Los Angeles at Pepperdine University. And then after that, I went to China, and I lived there for 9 years and got my master's degree there. I actually learned how to do therapy in Mandarin before English.
Wow.
And in that context, I realized how few resources there were in mental health field, not just in China, but in a lot of developing countries. And so I decided that I wanted to learn about really creative, innovative, effective, feasible, affordable, and scalable ways to increase access to effective mental health.
Great.
And so I decided to get a PhD, and I specifically wanted on depression and suicide treatment, and which led me to DBT. So I got my PhD at Duke, and then I got my clinical training at Harvard Medical School at McLean Hospital, where I learned how to do that work. And so now I guess I've come full circle, and I do a lot of training around Latin America for clinicians and psychiatrists who want to learn how to work with children and young adults who are suicidal and to support their families. And I'm also a professor at one of the Claremont colleges, and so I do research there also on the same topics.
Great. Definitely needed. There it seems to be an increase in suicidal ideation. I don't know if you find that to be true, but at least it's out there more. Kids are telling us more.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy, is a hot topic. A lot of therapists are interested in that approach. I think a lot of parents and families are interested in it. Can you share a little bit about what led you to wanting to learn more about that approach and how you have seen its benefits?
Yeah. I mean, a part of what led me to that is that when I was getting my master's degree at Peking University in Beijing, I was enrolled in initially they enrolled me in their general psychology program. I transferred to their clinical psych program, and then when it was time to have a practicum experience where I work in a hospital, they said, no, you can't because you're a foreigner, you don't know the language very well, you don't understand the culture. And I really wanted to, so I worked hard to convince them to let me do it. They finally said yes, and then my third client had borderline personality disorder and was really struggling a lot with her emotions, struggling a lot to feel understood. And at one point, I think it was like early in our therapy, maybe like session 5 or something, she stood up and she hit her head really hard against the wall, like 5 times. And I was like a first-year graduate student. I had no idea what to do. And so I just froze. Finally, she like stopped hitting her head because she was literally feeling dizzy and overwhelmed.
Oh, wow.
And I, of course, went back and tried to get a lot of supervision, and I asked different clinicians, and every week I would speak to clinicians. I was trying to get help. I was reading what I could. And a lot of the feedback I was getting from my supervisors, I was doing my best to apply those principles, but it wasn't working, and my clients seemed to be struggling even more and more. And not only was I not helping her, I felt like she was, decompensating in many ways. And finally, at one point, one of my supervisors suggested, you know what, I think that this client has borderline personality disorder. Mm-hmm. And so then I was like, all right, that's a helpful clue. And I started researching what that was, what that meant, and how to treat it. And then I came across DBT. I came across, Marshall Linehan. Mm-hmm. And as I read about it, I was like, whoa, this sounds like what my client needs. And I asked my supervisors, like, okay, can you teach this to me? And none of them had, they'd all heard of it, but they hadn't actually, been trained in it. And so I knew, okay, I need to go back, learn how to do this treatment so that I can help clients who have really, have a really hard time regulating their emotions. And for these clients, self-harm and suicidal ideation and even suicidal behaviors, for them it's a solution. And it's because they feel really hopeless. They feel like there is no other solution to their problems.
Right.
And that's the only possible solution that they can imagine being feasible to fix their problems is suicide. And so in this treatment, we give people more solutions. In that sense, it's very problem focused, mm-hmm. problem-solving focused and skills focused, right? The idea that some of these behaviors that seem like the problem to us as clinicians or family members are for the client the solution. But if we can give them other solutions, distress tolerance skills, emotion regulation skills, interpersonal effectiveness skills, then they won't have to turn to these other strategies, which in the short term do work for them, and of course in the long term end up causing, more problems and more suffering.
Absolutely. You mentioned that, well, it sounds like initially you became interested in it based on your client who had borderline personality disorder. And that's initially how the treatment was initiated, created for. And so you alluded to how it could really help treat teens who are struggling with other emotional dysregulation disorders. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, even most recently, like the new Marvel show, She-Hulk, like even She-Hulk needed DBT. I don't know if you saw like the most recent episode. Yeah, so like the Hulk is like teaching her how it is that he came to regulate, the Hulk inside of him, and he actually teaches DBT on Disney Plus. So yeah, I mean, it's not obviously like She-Hulk isn't suicidal and self-harming. It's just for people who who tend to be more sensitive than most of their peers, who tend to be more reactive, meaning like a smaller stimulus can elicit a big emotional reaction, and more reactive, meaning when they do have emotional response, it tends to be bigger, right? Like on a scale of 0 to 10, it can like shoot up to a 9 or 10 pretty quickly, and then they tend to have a harder time returning to baseline, right? Like returning to emotional calm, kind of like the Hulk, right? If you've seen any of the Marvel movies.
Yes.
And so a part of it is like learning skills to support our clients who have really big emotions, right? Like I almost just think of it like having a jet engine, like a fighter pilot engine. And if you haven't a train, it can be really like scary to fly, and a lot of people could get hurt. And so a lot of our clients just have like a really powerful emotional engine, and they need some of the training that's provided by DBT to be able to manage that effectively.
Right.
Which, again, it's exciting. Like, on the one hand, it can sound really scary, but of course, like, flying a fighter jet is so much more exciting than driving, like, a Volkswagen. I mean, and there's some people who are less reactive, they're less sensitive, it's easier for them to return to baseline.
Right.
And that's, the equivalent of a Volkswagen. And so if they have that, like, that jet engine, emotional engine, I think they just need more support to learn how to manage that, how to be able to turn it into something really awesome that fuels a lot of connection and a lot of creativity. But without those skills, without the structure that DBT can provide, it can oftentimes be messy. Like if you put someone into a jet without much training.
Absolutely. And DBT is an evidence-based program. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on some of the criticisms of DBT as far as, the lack of formal trauma processing. And just wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah. I think there's quite a few criticisms of DBT, and I think all of them are valid. Mm-hmm. I think one of the criticisms is how expensive it is, right? Because it has so many components to it. You have individual therapy, where you work on, helping people build a life worth living. You have skills group, where people learn these skills so that they can start to apply them to solve their problem. There's phone coaching, where the client has access to their therapist, not for like phone-based counseling sessions, but rather for like getting reminders of and support in using skills to solve problems rather than their other problematic behaviors. There is even a consultation team for the therapist so that we don't get burnt out if we're doing this work.
Sure.
And so that just makes it very, it's very expensive in that sense. And I think another criticism, like you had mentioned, is that it doesn't focus on, direct focus on trauma, right? Which, again, most of our clients have experienced significant trauma and oftentimes chronic trauma. Yeah. And their ways of coping with their difficulties, that is the best way that they know how to cope with their trauma, right? And not just trauma, like as we think of it, like a capital T index trauma, but even the trauma of being invalidated consistently over time
Right.
that is a common experience. Like traumatic invalidation is a common experience that some of our clients have had.
So prevalent.
And yeah, it's super prevalent, and that many times their behaviors that seem to many people as being really problematic are reasonable coping in response to to that trauma. And so I guess there's a few things that have happened in the last about 15 years in response to that. One is there is a protocol, a now evidence-based protocol that recently had their book published just this year by Melanie Harned, and it's called the DBT-PE protocol, the DBT prolonged exposure. So prolonged exposure is a treatment for clients who have PTSD developed by Ed Nafoa at the University of Pennsylvania, and it's evidence-based. And the other treatment is it's called DBT PTSD by Martin Bohus at the University of Heidelberg, and it's a treatment, again, that focuses on explicitly addressing the trauma that underlies many of the behaviors that we're seeing in our clients with borderline personality disorder. And so what that looks like, what that means is many times we have to first be able to support our clients to not be engaging in life-threatening behaviors, right? So first stabilize them, and then we can work on the trauma. And I guess maybe, one of the criticisms that some clients have is like, I want to directly start working on my trauma. What often happens in my experience is without first having really effective coping strategies to do that, then it actually makes them less emotionally stable, more suicidal. And so I guess it's more about the order in which we treat it. It's often, first let's have some skills on board so that you can manage, so that you can, explore and revisit some of these traumatic experiences and find ways to process them that's going to be more effective.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that, but again, the other difficult part is that it's a very difficult treatment to learn. And so what ends up happening also, I think another common criticism in DBT is that a lot of people say they're doing DBT, but they're not actually doing DBT. Like, they're just, they're calling what they do DBT, but maybe haven't gotten the rigorous training to do it, maybe just because they learned some DBT skills. And I think that also oftentimes, in my experience, can lead to a lot of the misunderstandings as well.
Right.
A lot of the criticisms are people are, putting a label on what they do as DBT, and it's found to be really ineffective because it is, in fact, ineffective for that client and the problem that they have.
Right. That makes sense. I'm curious if you can share a little bit, Dr. Rodriguez, about your parent coaching that you do at your institute and a little bit about your institute in general.
Yeah, so parent coaching, when we're working with adolescents and kids who need DBT, it's actually it's necessary. It's a necessary part of the treatment, and partly because the parents themselves need support. Oftentimes themselves have a lot of anxiety, right? They even have their own trauma of watching their kids attempt suicide, watching their kids do things that doesn't make a lot of sense to them. They've received a lot of stigma and judgments from others around them, and so they need a lot of... but the other piece that's important is when we're working with kids, sometimes we are trying to shape the contingencies that are reinforcing these problematic behaviors, and the parents are inadvertently, again, with all the best intentions, they're reinforcing ineffective behaviors. So let's say a kid self-harms, but prior to that, the kid was asking really effectively for their parents' support, for their parents' help, for their parents' care. The parents say no, ignore, even get mad at them, even call them entitled, and then the kid self-harms out of utter distress. Right. And then suddenly the parent drops everything, becomes really affectionate, is hugging them, is giving them what it is they asked for, is apologizing. Right? The amount of dopamine going through that kid's brain at that moment is so reinforcing. Any of the skills that we're teaching just can't compete with that. And so we also have to teach parents about reinforcement, teach them how to positively reinforce the behaviors that we're trying to increase, skills use, for example.
Right.
And we also have to teach them to set limits in ways that are effective, right? Absolutely. Because a lot of times parents want to set limits, but they don't know how to set clear limits.
Right.
And they don't know how to set limits that are small enough that they can hold consistently. And so instead they want their limits to be intense. They're like, I'm going to give a punishment, and it's going to immediately shape and extinguish that behavior.
Right.
And so we have to teach them about behaviorism and teach them how to validate their kids so that when they're letting these reinforcement and these punishment strategies in the background, when we're allowing those to slowly shape the behavior of their kid, that at the same time, those parents can be validating their kids at the same time. And the final thing is that parents themselves need skills, because the kids get emotionally dysregulated, and then the parents also get emotionally dysregulated, and then they just feed off of each other.
They feed off of each other, right.
And, it just becomes
a vicious circle, yeah.
A vicious cycle, yeah. And so if the kids learn a bunch of skills and then the parents don't, it's going to make it really tough for
the family to be successful,
to stay regulated,
right.
When their parents are yelling. And and also it's helpful to have a parent coach, because at some point in the therapy, we have to have difficult conversations where we bring the parents and the kids together.
Right.
And we say, okay, let's have some of those difficult conversations now that you've been learning your skills and the parents have been learning their skills, learning how to be non-judgmental, learning how to communicate in a way that's direct, in a way that's accurate. And now we can those conversations that you've been having a hard time so that you can arrive at collaborative problem solving and a shared understanding of what the problem is.
Absolutely.
So that's and also because parents themselves need phone coaching, right? Sometimes what happens is the kid has phone coaching, and then the kid is emotionally dysregulated. The parents feel scared, so they pick up the phone, they dial their kid's therapist, they put it on speakerphone and say, here, my kid is totally emotionally dysregulated.
Right.
They need phone coaching, give it to them. But if the kid isn't wanting coaching in that moment, then we can't force it on them. But if the parents in that moment are willing, we can say, you know what, your kid isn't willing right now, why don't you call your parent coach? And the parent coach can provide them with in-the-moment support. Like, what can you do as a parent
right in this moment?
To be able to, A, regulate your own emotions, and B, help support your kid as they're trying to regulate their own.
Right. Well, I really appreciate your information and for the work that you're doing. We're just about out of time for our program, Dr. Rodriguez, but really appreciate you being on the show and hope that you will come back so that we can talk to you more about Youth and Family Institute in Santa Monica and more about your research and all that you're doing to serve teens and their families. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carissa.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for joining us at Insight Treatment Hour, KHTS, Santa Clarita's hometown station, FM 98.1 and AM 1220. Welcome back to Insight Treatment Hour. My name is Carissa Provost, and we are talking to Dr. Rodriguez, clinical psychologist, and we are discussing more about the work that he's doing with teens and their families. Thank you for coming back, Dr. Rodriguez, and if you could share a little bit about your organization and how families can connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the Youth and Family Institute in Los Angeles. So our office is in West LA, and we're currently opening one in Claremont, which is right next to the Claremont colleges, where I also teach. And our patients can get a hold of us via email, right, at info@yfinstitute.com, or they can check us out on our website at youthandfamilyinstitute.com, all one word. And we specialize in working with youth and their families who are struggling with more severe and chronic and often comorbid depression, anxiety, and difficulties, who might need an evidence-based approach to help support them and hopefully stay out of the hospital and find a way to build a life worth living.
Right. Can you share something that you think oftentimes families who come to you, they're not sure about, but they wish that they had known before seeking treatment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one thing that parents, I think on the one hand, I guess I see two different, extremes sometimes, where some parents really, I think, underestimate how much their kids are suffering.
Yeah.
And they kind of feel like, I guess the worst of it might be that the parents even think their kid is faking it. They're like, oh, my
Right.
kid is just doing this for attention. And so for some parents, I just have to, I have to do a clear assessment of what I think the problem is. But never have I made an assessment where I'm like, yeah, this kid is just faking it, like, they're
Right.
fine. And so, in those cases, sometimes I just have to help educate parents of like, no, your kid is really suffering. And the moments where they act fine, those are actually the moments they're faking it.
That's right.
Versus the alternative where they're like, no, they're totally fine. And then every now and then they just, they act like they're, totally mentally ill. It's like, no, I think they're really struggling a lot and they're trying to hold it together sometimes and they can't at other times. So I think that's one side is just teaching parents about models of how kids suffer. And on the other side, I think some parents are so, and understandably, right, love their kids a lot,
Sure.
and they don't want any harm to come to them. And sometimes the lengths that they go through to protect their kids are not very realistic. And it actually, I almost have to teach the parents, like, your kid is okay. Like, that you can, I have some parents who will, like, sleep in the same room on the floor of their kids because
Right.
they're worried that they're going to do something, or they literally sleep outside of their door on the floor, and
Yep.
and they're constantly tracking them on the phone, and I think that again is oftentimes the parents' own trauma. Like,
Yes.
they're so, like, it
Their
was
own
so scary
trauma,
for
own
them to see their
anxiety.
kids suffer
Yeah.
that they're responding, and for those, in that sense, I have to tell parents, like, you know what, they're in good hands. Like, we're meeting with them regularly. They've got phone coaching. Like, in some senses, I'd say, like, it's okay to relax a little bit.
Yeah.
And I find that those are messages that I'm sharing often with parents, and sometimes both just at different moments. In some moments,
Absolutely.
like all of us, I think we're, when we care about something and we're afraid of losing it, I think it's hard to stay super centered and wise-minded and rational.
Right. Right. We see the same dynamics with families at Insight Treatment Center. So
I bet.
yeah. So again, thank you so much for being on the show.